Welcome to another episode of my interview series. Today I'm talking to Daniel Lacalle. He's a professor at the IE Business School in Madrid, chief economist at Tresis, and he is an expert on Austrian economics, the only one you should listen to. Danielle, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind intro. It's a great pleasure to be here.
So I've followed your work for a long time, but I reached out because you wrote an article recently called American Peronism. We call Kamala's economic policy, quoting here, the most radical socialist economic plan ever announced by the Democrats. So for listeners, can you kind of go through that plan and why it is so radical?
Well, we need to start from what it builds from, no? It builds from an already absolutely unsustainable level of deficit and debt, no? Government spending has gone through the roof, $11 trillion of government spending since the Biden administration and obviously Harris as the vice president took office. And we have to remember that the Biden administration took office when the economy was already booming. It didn't have to deal with COVID. It came in January 2021 when the economy was already not bouncing, but growing very, very aggressively and doing very well. So the $11 trillion of expenditure was completely unnecessary. And more importantly, what it has driven us to an absolutely unsustainable deficit despite record tax revenues. So why is this the most radical left-wing program ever presented by a Democratic candidate? Well, to start with, this is the first time in history that I see anybody in the United States try to convince voters of the stupidity of price gouging and the idea that it is businesses and grocery stores that are making inflation go up. So the fact that there is somebody out there even talking about price controls, a stupidity in economics that has never worked anywhere, no, is in itself a very dangerous alarm signal. But on top of it, it's a very aggressive redistributionist policy that, like price controls, achieves the opposite of what it intends to achieve. Now, price controls don't reduce prices. And this redistributionist policy, what it's going to do is tremendous impact on growth and tremendous impact on real wages and on savings of citizens. So why is it so radical? The reason why it's so radical is because it's trying to fool people with the idea that you can spend a further $2.25 trillion and think that it will be, quote unquote, offset by higher taxes to the wealthy and corporations, which is the most classical lie ever used in elections. We know that there is no way, there is no revenue measure that is going to offset an already insane $2 trillion deficit. The government has already running at a $1.5 trillion deficit in the first 10 months of the fiscal year 2024. So it's exceedingly radical because it's basically, and I call it American Peronism, to make it look like what is, it's actually very similar to socialism of the 21st century implemented by the Peronists in Argentina. And people will say, well, what an exaggeration. Okay, let's talk about the exaggeration. Price controls, monster subsidies everywhere, an incredible translation and transfer of wealth from the private sector to the private sector, bloating government spending, increasing the debt and the deficit, and on top of that, printing money like there's no tomorrow. Well, the Argentine Peronists did exactly that. The fact that in the United States things haven't gotten as bad as in Argentina doesn't mean that it is different to that socialist of the socialist 21st century socialism policy that tries to present itself as social. It tries to present itself as something that is going to help people. But it doesn't help people because people should understand that all the things that the government is telling that it's going to give you is going to cost you a lot more in inflation, in lower growth, in lower real wages, and certainly in lower improvement of employment.
Yeah, that point that you make about so Kamala is proposing 2.25 trillion in additional spending.
Yeah.
And that's kind of their standard go-to. I think the other day they asked her how she's going to pay for it, and she sort of waved her hands like, "Oh, this is going to create synergies," and she has no answer. And one of the things that's striking for me is that if you look at the taxes actually paid by rich people in the U.S., it rises as you get richer, and then it hits about 25%, and it stops. Right? So if you're making $1 million in the U.S., you pay about 25%. If you're making $1 billion, you also pay about 25%. And the reason, presumably, is because as the numbers get bigger, you hire better and better accountants and lawyers, and you set up trusts, and you move your money here and there and overseas. And the end result is that there's a ceiling. If you do an additional 2.25 trillion, and then you talk about the billionaires, you can't get that money.
Yeah.
Hey,
But
he's like, where in the world work to protect that money? Yeah.
not only that, is that these people live in La La Land. When they talk about billionaires, okay, what do billionaires have their money in? Stocks. The stocks of their businesses. Huh? Stocks that they don't sell and they cannot sell. Furthermore, imagine if tomorrow you read in the newspapers that Elon Musk or that Jeff Bezos was selling 10% of their share in their own companies. What would you do? You would sell your stock as well, no? So these new 21st century socialists live on the creation of envy for paper wealth, no? Mm-hmm. And the reason why, obviously, raising taxes to the wealthy always ends in being raising taxes to everybody is a very simple reason. You spend $2.25 trillion. You say that you're going to tax the rich and corporations. Those wealthy and those corporations don't increase their payments to the treasury for a very simple reason. Because most of that wealth is paper wealth that is not being sold, that cannot be sold, no? So, and more importantly, what you actually do is hurt. When they put the corporate tax at 28%, they're not hurting multi-mega cap companies. What they're hurting is the small and medium enterprises, no? Because it's not just being able to engineer or to have good tax advice, etc., which also, and is perfectly legal and no problem with that, but it's also the fact that they are making calculation based on literally science fiction. Because obviously they say, if I read the other day, if the top 25 billionaires in the world paid 3% of their wealth, then the world would not have debt or something like that, some stupidity like that. How is that calculated? As I said before, it's a stupid calculation on paper wealth. But more importantly, it's not even that. Is that it's only designed to generate envy and division. Anyone would understand that paying 25% of everything that you own, whether it is 1 million or 3 million or 10 million, is already a tremendous amount of money. More importantly, everybody should understand that what you would like to have is more people that make 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. What do you achieve by increasing taxes? Number one, the deficits don't come down. Number two, the debt certainly does not come down. And number three is that you get less people that are wealthy. People in America don't want to destroy the American dream. They want to get in the American dream. You may sell that to European citizens, maybe in France or in Spain or in Italy, where there's always been a culture of trying to be a public worker in order to have a very comfortable life and live off somebody else's taxes. But you don't sell that in America. And that's why I think it's incredibly dangerous. More importantly, I think it's incredibly disingenuous. And you've just mentioned it, is that she says, oh, well, we're going to create some synergies. What do you mean you're going to create some tax synergies? When do tax synergies come up? It's just ridiculous in every shape or form. And it's extremely dangerous because it's planting the seed of envy and division, which is the point is to try to debunk all these messages, not from the perspective of you're not going to collect the amount of money that is going to reduce the deficit, which we already know, is that it's immoral. It is immoral to take from the companies, the businesses that are actually generating jobs, investing, putting people to work and creating wealth, and increase taxes in order to maintain a subclass that then you are ultimately changing to a completely dependent class that does not improve. And that is what is dangerous about it all.
So you're in Europe, and tax rates there are often far higher than the U.S., places like Belgium or France. So talk a little bit about how that's different on the ground. Like, how is it different for small entrepreneurs, for mid-sized companies? Yeah. How does it differ from the U.S.?
Oh, I'll tell you what. For example, you know that if France has the largest percentage of companies with 49 employees of the world, no? Why do they have the largest percentage out of the total of companies with 49 employees? Because if you have 50 employees, you need to have unions controlling the numbers, unions controlling the company, unions controlling everything. And you start to get an enormous level of control from governments. That's why people say farcically that, oh, you know, you're talking about socialism, but this is not socialism because there's a lot of private companies. But the good definition of socialism, the proper definition of socialism, was created by Huerta de Soto, the Austrian economist, said that it's any type of aggression, institutionalized aggression against free entrepreneurship. And then when you understand that, the level of control imposed on companies, on businesses, on small businesses, on families, etc., is so enormous that it leads to stagnation. So when people in the United States tell me, hey, taxes in Europe are much higher, so what's the problem? That is not going to lead to a problem. Well, you're giving me as a comparison economies that don't grow, economies that have enormous levels of debt, and more importantly, economies in which discontent, in which social inequality, and in which social opportunities are actually very poor. It's interesting that people actually, when I speak in America, a lot of people say, well, you know, in France, this is great, etc., etc. I said, why are you putting France as a comparison? France hasn't had a balanced budget since the late 70s. France is not growing for the third consecutive decade. France has a very high level of unemployment compared to the United States, but more importantly, look at the riots, look at the social discontent. This subsidized economy creates a subclass of dependent citizens that ultimately are not perceiving any of those allegedly social benefits. What they are actually perceiving is that there are no opportunities. And ultimately, that leads to much higher discontent. The taxpayers are incredibly angry because they pay too much, and the ones that are allegedly are benefiting from those social programs are becoming a dependent, hostage social class that doesn't have opportunities. So discontent explodes all over the place.
And what's fascinating, you know, going back to those fantasies, those sort of left-wing fantasies, how if you just tax the billionaires, then we can get rid of all the debt. If you look empirically, there are countries in the world that take very little in taxes, and like Dubai, and they tend to have no debt.
Yeah.
Whereas the countries that take a lot in taxes, they actually have much bigger debts. You see this in the U.S. as well. So you have smaller states, smaller tax states like New Hampshire, they don't have much debt. California, enormous amounts of debt. So it's ironic. It's not that taking more taxes allows them to have less debt. On the contrary, it's like the taxes are almost a drug that makes them grow bigger and bigger. So the more taxes they collect, the more debt they end up with.
It's an excuse. Of course. Yeah. Everybody knows if having high taxes would be the solution to reduce the debt, Belgium or France would be high growth, low debt countries, yet they are no growth, high debt countries. It's an excuse. It's an excuse to bloat the size of government because it is an eternal transfer of wealth from the private sector and from the productive sector to the unproductive sector, the administrative burden and the entitlement programs. Ultimately, it is basically trying to say that by increasing taxes, you're going to get rid of the debt. Starts from a false premise. What happens when you have record level of taxes? We have seen it with the Biden administration. You spend a lot more. They spent a lot more. You have record tax revenues in the United States. By the way, record tax revenues with the corporate tax rate that the Trump administration set. Okay, so you have record tax revenues with the level of taxes for corporations that the Trump administration set, and you think that you're going to reduce debt and deficits by increasing taxes when the deficit spending has gone through the roof. It's already at $2 trillion per annum, and it's going to go to $2.6 trillion in the estimates of the CBO, of the Congressional Budget Office. Even if there is no recession, even if there is no debt crisis, and certainly even if there with record tax receipts. So you have just hit the nail on the head, is that high taxes are not a way to reduce debt. High taxes are an excuse to continue to increase the debt.
A word from our lead sponsor, Unchained.com. An IRA is an investment vehicle that can save you a lot of taxes. With Unchained, you can hold real Bitcoin in your IRA, and it's the only company where you hold the keys and can verify that your Bitcoin is not being relent like banks do. We've recently seen futures-based ETFs underperform holding your own Bitcoin, so why settle for less? Open a Bitcoin IRA for just 21 cents. Go to unchained.com/Bitcoin-IRA with promo code AUGUSTIRA. That's AUGUSTIRA. Now back to our show. Now, you've worked with, in Argentina, I believe you've been an advisor to Javier Milei and his team. When we're talking about Peronism, about socialism in Argentina, what policies has Milei enacted, and would those be feasible in an American or a European setting?
Well, what we have to remember that Milei arrives in Argentina as president when Argentina is an absolute train wreck. Okay, so it's important to put things in perspective. Milei inherits a 25% per month inflation, monthly inflation. Okay, Milei inherits a central bank that is completely bankrupt, but it's not just completely bankrupt with negative net reserves, but issues long-term obligations, remunerated obligations that are future printing of money, okay? And has about 20% of the GDP of the country in those monster time-bound machines, no? So, and obviously 50% poverty, an economy in the doldrums, everything like that. Why can it be implemented in the United States? Very simple. First, because it has been implemented in the United States. It has been implemented both by Democrat administrations and Republican administrations prior to this insanity of debt doesn't matter. No? The Clinton administration, the Reagan administration, etc., had a pro-growth, pro-business, improvement of real wages and improvement of the position of families. It's basically going back to understanding what the economy is. The economy is not something that the government plays with in a sort of like a puppeteer way. The economy is very complex. In Austrian economics, we always look at human action and the importance of human action. Socialism denies human action, thinks that the government can engineer everything, no? So basically what Milei has done in Argentina is first to stop the bleeding, and that is the first step of the process. Now what he is starting to do once things have been, restored at the central bank, etc. What he is trying to do is to implement pro-growth strategies. And what I find interesting is that in the economic debate, what is called radical is what Millet is doing, which is what has always worked in economies to grow. It has worked in the United States, it has worked in Ireland, it has worked in Luxembourg, it has worked in the Netherlands, in the UK, everywhere. No? Interestingly, no, the ones that are called radical are the ones that are talking about sanity in the public accounts, and the ones that are called the farcically progressive, when it's fundamentally regressive, are the ones that are going to destroy the purchasing power of the currency and increase massively the level of government size in the economy. Because that is ultimately the goal. The goal, ultimately, is to make the size of government in the economy so large that the average citizen believes that the government is the solution instead of the problem.
Absolutely. So if we just try socialism one more time, it's going to work. And those are the guys who are the mainstream, whereas the guys who talk about centuries of experience are the radicals. Now, one of the points that you mentioned in the article is about how we're spending in the U.S. 6% deficit, but we're only getting 2% annual growth. Talk about why that's a problem and the sustainability of that.
Yes, because we hear that the economy is strong, no? But when deficit spending is 6% of GDP, and the GDP is only growing by 2%, ultimately, this is the worst level of growth adjusted for accumulation of debt. So the problem is basically that you have a sort of doped economy in which the government spending and government programs are disguising the real situation of the private sector and the productive economy and the job creation and real wage growth in the private sector. So why is that a problem? The problem is because that never leads to higher growth and always leads to stagnation. And people may say, okay, as long as I'm receiving some money from the government, then I'm fine with stagnation. Well, there's another problem to that. It's not just stagnation. Is that will always inevitably lead to lower real wages, destruction of the middle class, because the entire policy is to get rid of the middle class. The middle class is the one that actually thinks and gets angry and changes governments, no? Socialism is never about redistributing from the wealthy to the poor. It's about redistributing from the middle class to government. And when people understand that, they understand why it never works. And it never works because it leads to lower growth, lower real wages, worse living conditions, and in destruction of productivity, because it's a transfer of wealth from the productive to the unproductive parts of the economy.
Beautiful. One of the other things that you address in the article is debt forgiveness. So Biden has been doing this with student loans. Kamala is pushing it, presumably for student loans, but also for medical debt. So you've said that setting aside the problems with the U.S. medical system, which are legion, the concept of debt forgiveness, especially for things like student loans, you've said that it's profoundly antisocial. Explain why.
Well, first, because it is not debt forgiveness. It is forgiving, imagine, my debt and pass it on to you. So it's profoundly antisocial because it's not just forgiving my debt and passing it on to you, but passing it on to you, your children, and your grandchildren. That is profoundly antisocial. Furthermore, it is completely immoral because the system in the United States already has a number of tools to address difficulties in payment via restructuring of debt, via all sorts of things that can be done with the support of government. That can happen. So the idea that the government is actually forgiving anything is a joke. You're seeing it back then in higher taxes, in higher inflation, and in higher debt for the rest of the of citizens. But it's also profoundly immoral. Now, think about this. Imagine as my kids or the people that have taken student loans and gone to university, etc., and you've repaid it and you get no benefit whatsoever. And those that have not repaid it get their debt forgiven. What is the next batch of kids going to think? I'm not going to pay for it. Somebody will forgive it at some point. No? So you're inherently already creating a system of perverse incentives. Furthermore, tell that to all of the parents that went through all sorts of hardships in order to support their kids in their student loans. They don't get any forgiveness. So it's incredibly immoral. Now, what you have to do, by the way, when there are, I understand that you can take measures to ease the burden for the people that have high levels of debt and difficulties and that want to repay them. That's fine. There are all sorts of systems and tools within the system where you can achieve that. But doing it just like that creates a very negative, perverse incentive. And more importantly, and it also creates a much worse perverse incentive, which is, okay, I'm a university, I'm charging $80,000 a year for tuition, and I cannot think it's expensive because the government is going to pay for it if people cannot pay the debt. So I'm going to raise the tuition fees, which they did, by the way.
Yeah, we've seen there was a study out last week that the average university degree now costs $300,000. You've got students who live in these glorious, they almost look like resorts. They've got, a lazy river going around the dorm, and it's very, very luxurious considering these people don't have jobs. But of course, the reason is exactly that. It's subsidized by taxpayers, and now they've got the prospect that maybe the whole thing will be forgiven. Why not get a free Lamborghini with your college degree if it's going to be forgiven?
Isn't it amazing? Yeah. Why? It's even worse. It's not even get a free Lamborghini. It's why not enter into a massive debt to purchase a Lamborghini, and the ones that cannot afford it, they will receive a subsidy from all other taxpayers, and the ones that made the effort to pay for it, they're actually going to pay twice.
Are you tired of your gold and silver collecting dust? Well, you can earn between 5 and 12% interest on your physical gold and silver with Monetary Metals. For the last 8 years, Monetary Metals has been offering passive income on your gold and silver paid in more physical ounces. They're run by trusted folks who've been passionate champions of liberty for decades, and you can earn up to 5% in their gold and silver leases, while accredited investors can earn up to 12% interest in their current silver bond offering. Check out monetary-metals.com/Peter to learn more about putting your precious metals to work today. So if you're looking for a podcast that cuts through the noise and delivers honest, truthful, and conservative perspectives, check out the Daily Signal podcast. Each weekday, they bring you interviews with policymakers on the issues that matter most. From breaking down complex legislation to exposing media bias, they're committed to giving you the facts you won't hear from the establishment media. Subscribe now to the Daily Signal podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Now back to the show. Now, as you know, Kamala she's finally started to announce some of her economic policies, and she's rolled out one gem, which is price controls. So we know what happened with price controls in the U.S. We had shortages of housing, empty shelves, gasoline lines. Talk about Europe. Surely there are idiots in Europe who have tried price controls. How have those turned out? Have they worked?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I mean, you had in France, for example, when they tried price controls, what you had immediately in a very short period of time was an increase in prices, an increase in the underground economy. And this is a very important factor that very few people talk about. In the academia, people don't talk about how the system finds ways to move goods and services around. So an increase in the underground economy, an increase in shortages, and an increase in prices, So obviously, it's so ludicrous. If people were smart enough and understood that government is only giving them the things that they already take from somebody else, they would understand that governments don't reduce prices, governments increase prices. because governments benefit from higher prices. They collect more taxes, and they also reduce in real terms their indebtedness through the destruction of the purchasing power of the currency. So to think that the government is going to reduce prices literally is like thinking that your local drug dealer is going to reduce the price of cocaine or heroin.
So speaking of debased currency, in the U.S., in Europe, I think we're all agreed at this point. People actually seem to agree on all sides that we are at an unsustainable level. The debt has skyrocketed. We're not even in a deep recession, and it's exploded. So where do you think this ends? Does the U.S., does Europe keep piling on debt like Japan? Do we get the 50, 60 trillion? Or at what point does it collapse? And are we going to get warning signs when it collapses?
Well, people think that the accumulation of debt is going to end with a bang, and it doesn't. The way that it ends is with stagnation, complete stagnation. France, Japan, no? The economies that simply don't grow, and they implement more stimulus packages and they don't grow. Economies that are simply so bloated, no? Huh? Think about this. This is just literally like trying to believe that if I eat a lot of candy and I gain a lot of weight, I'm going to run faster. It's not going to happen, no? So the way that it ends is with stagnation and with a situation that always ends with the middle class being completely destroyed. Because, as I said before, the objective is not to go against the super wealthy. Super wealthy, my dear friends, in Europe and Japan are super socialist. You know why they're super socialist? Because socialism gets rid of all of the competition against them. So they pay a small percentage of higher taxes to get rid of everybody in small businesses, in the middle class, etc., that could actually climb the ladder and get to their point. So once you understand that, why the elites are defending these programs is because they perpetuate those who are already in the elite and make it impossible or virtually impossible for those that want to better themselves, that want to grow, that want to get, and that have actually the talent and the opportunity and the means to get there. It's a tremendous way of destroying the ladder, no? So the way that it ends is with stagnation and with the destruction of the American dream.
And at that point, people get frustrated. We've seen that through history. If you've got an economy that's growing and all of a sudden it levels off, that's when people get upset. It's ironic, in poor countries, they're not necessarily upset. This was Che Guevara's mistake, right? He went to Cuba, got the revolution because the economy had been growing and leveled off, and then they went to Bolivia. It didn't work out because it was too poor. It was not in that situation. But ironically, you know, if we look at places like Europe and the U.S., do you think there will be, I mean, we're already seeing unrest, but do you think it'll increase as that stagnation becomes clear?
Yeah, because there's a problem is that many people say, well, you know, stagnation, I've actually read this from Keynesian economists. Now, well, stagnation is not that bad. Look at Japan. Japan is doing fine. It's not doing fine, my friend. It is not doing fine. And there's a lot of unrest. And there's a lot of unintended consequences, like families that simply, the children simply don't want to study, don't want to work, don't want to do anything. They just stay in their room and hope to die. And in France, in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, what you see is a growing unrest because ultimately, this social engineering is profoundly anti-human nature. Humans, we want to better ourselves. We want to save some money and give it to our kids so that they can do better than we did. We want to achieve better things and to achieve our objectives. And when you impose from government that things have to be always equalized, the only way in which you can equalize is down. So what that creates is higher social inequality and the worst social inequality that exists, because competitive inequality is not bad. If I know you and I know that you're doing very well, and hey, what a tremendous example. Peter is a great example. Hey, I'm going to learn from you, and maybe that helps me to improve and get better. So that, which is called copied inequality, is actually a positive, no? The problem is when inequality is by government design. The problem is when inequality is under the decision of what is government deciding that is equal and unequal. Because what is more unfair? Somebody that has a business and makes a lot of money and creates a lot of wealth, or a politician that lives with all free expenses and in tremendous levels of comfort from taxpayers' money? For me, I think that it's more unfair to see a politician that is making $120,000 to $200,000 plus all free expenses than Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos.
That's a fascinating point that culturally we've really shifted as government has taken over. So as you say, if you look at cultural production 100 years ago, there was a lot of emphasis on imitating the successful and imitating the rich. Children's books, they would give examples of kids who worked hard and succeeded and learned how to play the violin or learn how to swim. And if you compare that to the cultural production today, particularly for kids, which is quite dangerous, it is, it's really focused on diversity, tolerance, distribution, on sort of these communist values that it's no longer about success. It's about sort of leveling, knocking down anybody who's successful, so that all of us have the same outcomes. And maybe that's a consequence of the government takeover.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But culture historically has always had quite a significant percentage of, let's say, left-leaning messages. Always. No, the entrepreneur is the bad guy, the successful guy, all of those things. I think that what has changed is that culture has become from having that message from a sort of anti-establishment process or anti-establishment positioning to a message that is pro-establishment. No? This is a huge difference. It's not the same to be sort of revolutionary against the man and the system, but to be pro the system. You see what I mean? So I think that what has changed is precisely that culture is trying constantly to say to young kids, it's not worth it. I was shocked watching the Olympics this past weeks, the number of times hearing commentators in French and UK news outlets saying, sport is so unfair. They should have given them a medal for trying. They should have given them a medal for trying. What the hell is that? No? Yeah. So this idea that if somebody succeeds is because of something unfair, something that has been taken from somebody else, no? I heard from a Spanish commentator in the Olympics, the bronze medal was snatched away from us unfairly. Oh, really? Unfairly? As far as I know, somebody won, no? Somebody won, having been a better athlete. But you know what's great? Is that people don't buy it. Is that when people understand why their favorite baseball player, their favorite soccer player makes hundreds of millions of dollars. People understand why the favorite singer, they not only understand, but I mean, you talk to my kids, they know exactly how much Taylor Swift has grossed in her last tour. Huh? And they completely understand that Taylor Swift makes 1,000, 5,000 times more than the guy that brings the guitars, if there are any guitars, I don't even care, that brings the guitars to the stage. No? So ultimately, I have a positive attitude, and it doesn't work.
All right, so final question is staying with that. So one emphasis, I think Austrians are much more friendly towards analyses that include human nature. And it sounds like you're optimistic that, there are a lot of things that are stacked against us. Obviously, the bad guys have more resources than we do. They have more influence in education and media and so on. But it sounds like you're an optimist. Why are you optimistic?
I think that first because the ideas of freedom win hands down in social media. If you you may have a lot of corporate action and a lot of sort of mainstream media pushing toward a typical woke or leftist agenda, but in social media and in the new technologies, freedom ideas are actually winning hands down, and it's very simple. The kids of today look at things and they're not stupid. They know that the national debt is completely unsustainable. They know that they're not going to get the pension that their grandparents got. They know that they're going to get a lot more taxes. So I think that is an important factor. Now, is that the system, the sort of mainstream Keynesian system has reached a breaking point in which taxpayers, small businesses, families, kids actually understand that. And the reason why I'm optimistic is because it is so obvious that, for example, Kamala Harris, that went to the 2020 Democratic Convention with a proposal of bringing the corporate tax rate to 35%, not even her can say today that she wants a 35% tax rate. She has to say 28%. She will get to 35% if she can. But you see, even her voters know that that is a bad thing.
And you're right. You know, if you take the censorship over the past couple of years, that really took off the year that Trump and Brexit both happened, 2016. It really accelerated. And in a sense, that was an admission that they failed.
Yeah.
Trillions of taxpayer dollars that they steal and use against us who promote liberty, the education system, the media, they have every advantage on earth. And they still fail to the point that all they can do now is just try to shut people up. It's astounding that they would lose so badly.
Oh, socialism always works that way. Socialism is always about propaganda and then repression, always. Because propaganda makes you, get closer to the voter. But once people get angry because it doesn't work, then you use repression. And I think that what a lot of people are starting to understand is that they feel that there's a tremendous push for auto-censorship. They feel that we used to be able to have an open, fun discussion with people with completely different ideological views. I remember I had friends from all different sides, and we had a lot of fun, and we would discuss, sometimes heated discussions. And we continued to be friends. But now it's all about division. It's all about censorship. And people understand when they have to do things as insane. I have never in my life, my kids are older now, but when my children were small kids, I never had to think about what movie we were going to see, let alone see the movie beforehand so that they would not get indoctrinated. Now you have to do that. Now you basically have to go to what are they thinking of watching? Oh, wait a second, because I've read some things about this movie that are completely outrageous in terms of the obscene level of indoctrination. No? So I think that all those things, people have started to see that it is affecting their daily lives. It is affecting them at work. They used to have an open discussion at work about numbers of things. Now they can't talk about anything at work. It's affecting them in their small business. They're trying to get their business afloat, and they get more and more taxes and administrative burdens, etc., etc. All those things. So people, let's say that the tolerance level for interventionism reached a peak. And I think that with the COVID lockdowns, I think that it just got to a point in which people said no more.
People had enough. The friction points had increased to the point where people react to one, and then often it's like pulling the thread on a sweater, right? Once they question one policy, they just go across the board and they start doubting it all, which is a beautiful process to behold. I have been talking today with Daniel Lacalle. How can people follow your work?
Well, it's relatively easy. You can find me on Twitter. It's at @Lacalle_IA. You can also find me in my YouTube channel, Daniel Lacalle in English, and in my website, dlacalle.com/en. And I always say that it's easier to find me than to avoid me. So it's not difficult. Just Google Daniel Lacalle and you'll find a way, and we can have a discussion, hopefully.
Love it. And Danielle's got fantastic content, especially on Europe. So if you'd like to know what's happening over there, an absolute top-level source. And he knows Austrian economics, which is a very nice change for mainstream media. Danielle, thank you for coming on. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And folks, remember to subscribe for weekly interviews along with my roundup of all the week's videos. Check them out at petersange.com. Okay, we'll be watching.